My name is Illy, and I never thought I'd be sharing this story. But after what I experienced during my death, I realize I have no choice. I was a soldier, trained for battle, hardened by war. Death was not new to me. I had seen it in the hollow eyes of my comrades, in the quiet moments after an ambush, in the blood that seeped into the dirt, claiming another life. I told myself I was ready, that when my time came I would accept it, just like I had seen so many others do. But I was wrong. No one is ready for what comes after. It was supposed to be a routine patrol. The air was thick with dust, the heat pressing down on us like an unseen hand. The streets were quiet, too quiet. My grip tightened on my rifle as we moved through the narrow alleyways, scanning every window, every rooftop. Civilians walked past, their eyes avoiding ours. A child peeked from behind a doorway, watching us with a solemn expression. Something in my gut twisted, a deep unease settling over me like a shadow. Then the world exploded. A deafening roar, a flash of light, and suddenly I was weightless. My body was flung backward, the impact slamming through me like a hammer. Pain lanced through my side, hot and searing, but it was distant, like it belonged to someone else. The ground rushed toward me, and then nothing, silence. But it wasn't just silence. It was an absence of everything. No sound, no pain, no fear. Just an endless void stretching in all directions. I tried to move, to breathe, but there was nothing to move, nothing to breathe with. Panic surged through me, but even that felt muted, as if my emotions were distant echoes of what they should have been. Then I saw it. My body sprawled on the ground, motionless. My uniform torn, blood pooling beneath me. My comrades shouting, their voices muffled and distorted as if they were speaking from the other end of a long tunnel. I saw the medic kneel beside me, pressing down on my wound, his hands slick with my blood. His lips moved, shouting my name, but I couldn't hear him. I should have felt fear. I should have felt something. But all I felt was an overwhelming sense of detachment, as if I was watching a play unfold when I had no part in anymore. I was above it all, floating, weightless, untethered from everything I had ever known. Then the pull began. It was subtle at first, a gentle tug, like a current pulling me towards some unseen destination. The light came next, not a blinding light, not something I could even describe with words. It was everywhere and nowhere at once, a presence more than an illumination. It wrapped around me, through me, filling every part of my being with warmth and something I had never known before, peace. I drifted toward it, and with each passing moment, the world I had known faded further and further away. The cries of my comrades, the weight of my body, the life I had lived, it all dissolved into insignificance. For the first time, I felt truly free. Then a voice. It wasn't spoken, not in the way we understand speech. It resonated within me, a soundless whisper that carried more power than any command I had ever received. You are not done. The peace shattered. A force stopped me mid-drift, and suddenly I was no longer floating. I was standing, though there was no ground beneath me. The light dimmed, shifting, and before me stood a figure. Not a man, not a shadow, something beyond comprehension. It radiated presence, a being of unfathomable depth. I couldn't look directly at it, yet I saw it clearer than anything I had ever seen before. I knew, instinctively, that this was no ordinary presence. It was something greater, something beyond anything I had believed in, and it knew me. Every thought, every sin, every doubt I had ever harbored, it all lay bare before it, and yet there was no condemnation, no anger, only sorrow. The war you have fought is nothing compared to the war that is coming. The words settled into my soul like a heavy weight. My mind reeled, grasping for understanding, but something deeper than thought told me the truth. The battle I had known, the bloodshed, the violence, it was only a shadow of the real war. I wanted to speak, to ask what it meant, but before I could form the words, the vision came. It was not a place, not a time, but a knowing. I saw a world I recognized, yet it was different, Cities stood tall, technology more advanced than anything I had ever seen. People moved through their lives unaware, unconcerned. But beneath the surface something was wrong. It was in their eyes. A lifelessness, a vacancy. They spoke, they laughed, they lived, but they were not alive. Something else moved behind their gaze, something watching, waiting, and then the control. It was subtle, so subtle that they never noticed. Their thoughts were not their own, their choices an illusion. They followed blindly, believing themselves free while the strings wrapped tighter around them. I wanted to look away, but the vision held me captive. And then I saw the deception. A leader, a figure unlike any other. Charismatic, beloved, worshipped. He spoke of unity, of peace, of a world without war, and the people listened. They followed. They gave everything, believing they were building a paradise, but beneath it all I saw the truth. It was a cage, a beautifully constructed lie. And those who questioned, those who resisted, they were cast out, silenced, erased. The figure turned, and for a brief moment I saw its eyes, not human. A darkness so deep, so endless that it swallowed everything. I gasped, or at least I felt the echo of a gasp. The presence beside me remained silent, allowing me to process what I had seen. "This is what awaits," the voice finally said. "This is the battle yet to come." Terror unlike anything I had ever known gripped me. This was worse than war, worse than death. This was something far greater, and I was powerless against it. I turned to the being, desperation clawing at me. "How do we stop it?" The answer came, quiet yet undeniable. "The truth." And then, before I could ask more, before I could even process the weight of those words, everything shifted. The light disappeared. The warmth vanished, and pain, blinding, searing pain, rushed back into me as I gasped for air. I choked, my lungs burning as air forced its way back inside me. My body convulsed, pain exploding from every nerve. The warmth was gone, the peace ripped away, replaced by agony and confusion, shouting. Hands pressing down on my chest, a mask forced over my face, someone yelling my name. My vision swam, flickering between the harsh fluorescent lights above me and the fading remnants of the vision I had just witnessed. The lifeless eyes of the people in that false world still burned in my mind, the chilling emptiness of their expressions more terrifying than anything I had ever seen in combat. A sharp voice cut through the chaos. "He's back. At least stay with me." I tried to speak, but my throat was raw. The words wouldn't come. My hands trembled as I reached for the nearest person, gripping onto the sleeve of a medic crouched beside me. His eyes, wide with shock, met mine. "You were gone," he whispered. "No pulse for over 2 minutes. 2 minutes. It had felt like eternity." The room spun, the pain in my side a dull roar compared to the weight pressing on my chest. Not just from the injury, from the truth, from what I had seen. I tried again to speak, forcing my throat to cooperate. I saw, but before I could finish, darkness claimed me again. When I woke again, the room was quieter. The beeping of machines hummed in the background, the steady rhythm of my heartbeat filling the sterile hospital air. I was no longer in the field, no longer surrounded by the frantic shouts of my team. For a moment, I thought maybe I had dreamed it all. Maybe the explosion had knocked me unconscious, scrambled my brain, and the vision had been some fevered hallucination. But then I moved, just slightly, and the pain brought it all back, and I knew it was real. The door creaked open and I turned my head, wincing. A familiar face appeared, Oren, one of the medics from my unit. His expression was unreadable as he stepped inside, his usual bravado missing. "You scared the hell out of us," he said, pulling up a chair. I tried to manage a weak smile, but it didn't reach my eyes. Not as much as I scared myself. His gaze flickered to the machines monitoring my vitals. "We thought we lost you. I was the one working on you, Illy. Your heart stopped. For too long." I swallowed hard. "I know," he frowned. How? The words hovered on my tongue, but I hesitated. How could I explain? How could I put into words something that felt so beyond human understanding? Would he even believe me? I licked my dry lips, staring at the ceiling. I went somewhere, I said finally. When I was out, I saw something. Oren's expression shifted, a flicker of something, worry maybe, crossing his face. You mean like a dream? I shook my head. No, it wasn't a dream. He didn't say anything at first, just studied me like he was searching for signs of trauma. But then he sighed and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You wouldn't be the first to say that, he admitted. I've heard stories before. Soldiers who flatlined, saw the other side, came back different. A spark of hope ignited in my chest. And do people believe them? His hesitation was all the answer I needed. I looked away, jaw tightening. Of course, people didn't want to believe things like this. They wanted science, logic, things they could measure and explain, not warnings from the dead, but I had to try. Oren, I said, voice steady, what if I told you I saw something about the future? He blinked. The future, I nodded, struggling to sit up. Not just the future, something coming. A deception. A war, but not the kind we're fighting. His expression darkened. You're still on pain meds, Eli. Maybe you should rest. No, I said sharply. Listen to me, I saw it. People controlled, manipulated, and they didn't even know it. A world that looked normal on the surface, but underneath. I shook my head. It was a lie. Oren's jaw clenched. And you think this was real? I met his gaze, unwavering. I know it was. Silence stretched between us. He exhaled, running a hand over his face. Eli, you've been through hell. You almost died. Maybe this is just your brain trying to make sense of— No, I interrupted. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't some near-death illusion. It was real. Oren looked away, clearly uncomfortable. I could see it. He wanted to believe me, but the rational part of him wouldn't let him. He had spent too much time saving lives with his hands, trusting science, relying on facts. What I was telling him didn't fit into that world. And if I couldn't even convince him, how could I convince anyone else? I felt a deep, sinking weight in my chest. The being had told me that people wouldn't listen, that the deception was already in motion. And now, sitting in this hospital bed, watching my friend struggle to comprehend what I was saying, I realized how true that was. No one would listen, but I couldn't stay silent. I forced myself to lean closer. Oren, you know me. I don't scare easily. I've seen death 100 times over. And I am telling you, I have never been more afraid than I was when I saw what's coming. For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed his face. What are you saying, Eli? I clenched my fists. That something is happening, and no one sees it. He rubbed the back of his neck, exhaling slowly. Even if— He stopped himself, shaking his head. No. Look, I don't know what you think you saw, but you need to focus on recovering. Your body's been through enough. I wanted to argue, to make him understand, but I could see the wall going up between us, the doubt settling in his mind. And I realized that this wasn't going to be easy. I was alive. But I had come back with a truth no one wanted to hear, and I had no idea what to do next. Got it? Here's the next section. Days passed in a haze of painkillers, restless sleep, and the distant murmur of conversations I was too exhausted to participate in. My body was healing, but my mind was fractured, torn between the reality I had returned to and the horrifying vision that refused to fade. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. Empty faces, glassy eyes, people who moved like puppets but believed themselves free. It gnawed at me, a sickness in my soul deeper than any battlefield wound. I needed to talk to someone. Not a medic, not a superior, and certainly not a psychologist who would scribble notes and file me under trauma-induced delusions. I needed someone who had seen what I had, someone who wouldn't look at me like I was insane, and that's when I remembered Sergeant Avi. Avi had been in my unit years ago before an IED nearly took his life. He had been clinically dead for almost 3 minutes before they revived him. When he came back, he wasn't the same. He left the military soon after, disappeared from everyone's radar. There had been rumors. Some said he found religion, others claimed he went off-grid entirely. I never gave it much thought before, but now I had to find him. It took some effort. The military had no official record of where he'd gone, and the few old contacts I reached out to were reluctant to talk. Finally, a friend of a friend mentioned a small community in the north near TZ-Fat. "He's up there," the guy said, "but don't expect a warm welcome." Avi doesn't talk to outsiders much. That was enough for me. The doctors weren't happy about me leaving the hospital so soon, but I didn't care. My ribs ached with every breath and my side burned with each step, but I pushed through it. I borrowed a car from a friend and made the drive north, the city lights fading behind me as I wound through the hills towards something I didn't fully understand. The air was cooler here, the sky vast and endless, untouched by the artificial glow of civilization. When I finally reached the settlement, it was barely more than a cluster of small houses nestled into the hillside, quiet and self-contained. I asked around, but people were wary, their eyes lingering on my uniform before they muttered half answers. Eventually, a boy, couldn't have been more than 12, pointed toward a house on the far edge of the community. "He doesn't like visitors," the kid warned before running off. I stood in front of the door for what felt like an eternity before knocking. Footsteps. A pause. The door creaked open just a fraction, revealing a pair of sharp, wary eyes beneath a thick brow. Avi had aged since I last saw him, his beard longer, streaked with gray, but his presence was the same, intense, calculating. "You shouldn't have come," he said. I swallowed. "I had to." Avi studied me for a long moment before sighing and opening the door wider. "Come in." The inside of the house was sparse, almost monastic. Wooden shelves lined the walls, filled with books that looked ancient, their spines cracked from years of use. A small oil lamp flickered in the corner, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. He motioned for me to sit. "Tell me," he said, his voice quieter now. "What did you see?" I didn't bother asking how he knew. He just did. I told him everything. The battlefield, the explosion, the suffocating void that came before the light, the warmth, the voice, and then the vision. I described the streets filled with people who weren't people anymore, the illusion of normalcy stretched over something sinister and hollow. I spoke of the warning, the deception that had already begun, the sense of urgency I couldn't shake. Avi listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When I finally finished, he leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You're not the first," he said. A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" He gestured to the books lining his shelves. "For centuries, there have been accounts of soldiers, prophets, ordinary men who died and returned with glimpses of what's to come. Some were dismissed as madmen. Others were burned as heretics, but the pattern is always the same." He fixed me with a piercing stare. A warning, a test, a choice. I gripped the arms of my chair. "And what does it mean?" Avi's gaze darkened. "It means we are closer than ever." The weight of his words settled over me like a stone. "So what do we do?" His lips pressed into a thin line. "That depends. Are you willing to listen?" I nodded without hesitation. Avi rose, moving to one of the shelves. He pulled down an old, leather-bound book and set it in front of me. The pages were brittle, filled with handwritten text in Hebrew, Aramaic, and something else I didn't recognize. He tapped a passage near the middle. "This was written by a man who lived centuries ago," he said. "A scholar who claimed he was taken beyond the veil and shown the final deception. He wrote that the greatest danger wouldn't come from war, famine, or disease, but from a lie so convincing that even those who thought themselves wise would fall for it." My blood ran cold. "And what was the lie?" Avi met my gaze. "That freedom is slavery. That control is safety. That to resist is to be the enemy." I thought of the faces in my vision, the empty, compliant stares, the invisible chains binding them to something they couldn't even see. "It's already started," I whispered. Avi nodded. "Yes." A silence stretched between us, thick with understanding. I had come looking for answers, but all I had found were more questions, more weight pressing down on me. Finally, Avi spoke again. "You have a choice, Illy. You can try to forget, go back to your life, pretend this never happened. Or you can open your eyes and see the world for what it really is." I didn't hesitate. "I can't unsee it, I won't." Avi studied me, then nodded as if he had expected that answer. "Then you need to be careful, because once you start looking they will know." A shiver ran through me. "Who?" Avi's expression darkened. "Those who built the illusion." I felt it then, that same deep, gnawing fear I had felt in the vision. The understanding that I had stumbled onto something vast, something ancient, and that whoever was behind it, they wouldn't let me expose it without a fight, but I had made my choice, and there was no turning back. The drive back was silent, save for the occasional hum of the tires against the road. The highway stretched before me, a ribbon of asphalt winding through the hills, but I barely saw it. Avi's words echoed in my mind over and over, like a warning carved into the marrow of my bones. I had spent my life following orders, believing in structure, in discipline, in the idea that there were good guys and bad guys, and that we were fighting to protect something real. But what if the battle wasn't where I thought it was? What if the real war was invisible, waged not with bullets but with lies? The air in the car felt heavy. I rolled down the window, letting the wind whip against my face, grounding me. But the feeling didn't pass. The gnawing unease, the weight pressing against my chest, it only deepened. And then the headlights behind me flickered. Once, twice, I glanced in the rearview mirror. A black SUV, tinted windows, keeping pace with me but not passing. The road was empty aside from us. A coincidence, maybe, but something in my gut twisted. I switched lanes. So did they. I slowed down. So did they. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Avi's warning came back to me. "Once you start looking, they will know." My pulse quickened. I pressed down on the accelerator, feeling the car lurch forward. The SUV followed, matching my speed, not a coincidence. I scanned the road ahead. No turn-offs, no exits, just an open stretch of highway and the growing certainty that I was not supposed to leave that meeting alive. Avi had known. He had let me in, given me answers, but had it cost him? Had they been watching me before I even arrived? The SUV edged closer. Too close. My heart pounded. If they forced me off the road, no. I couldn't let that happen. I yanked the wheel to the right, cutting across the empty lane, skidding onto a side road I barely saw in time. Gravel spat up beneath my tires as I fought for control. The SUV shot past the turn but didn't hesitate. It braked hard and swung around. I wasn't losing them that easily. I tore through the winding back road, trees blurring past, the engine roaring as I pushed it harder than I ever had. The SUV was gaining. No sirens, no flashing lights. Whoever they were, they weren't police. And that terrified me more than anything. I needed to think, needed to act. A fork in the road appeared up ahead, one path leading into the darkness of the hills, the other toward a small town. Lights, people, witnesses. I took the second road without hesitation. My tires screamed as I sped into the outskirts, past shuttered shops and dimly lit homes. The SUV hung back now, slowing, assessing. They weren't going to make a move here, not with people around. I spotted a gas station and pulled in fast, throwing the car into park before killing the engine. My hands were shaking. The SUV rolled past, didn't stop, didn't even hesitate. But I knew this wasn't over. I sat there, gripping the wheel, my breaths coming fast and shallow. My body still ached from my injuries, my ribs screaming in protest, but I barely felt it. I wasn't imagining this. Someone didn't want me asking questions. Someone didn't want me alive. I leaned my head back against the seat, staring up at the ceiling of the car. My vision swam with flashes of what I had seen in that place between life and death. The empty faces, the deception, the warning. And now the hunt. This wasn't just a vision anymore. It was real, and I had to find out why. I sat in the parked car, my breath shallow, my pulse still hammering from the chase. The gas station's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a cold, artificial glow onto the cracked pavement. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I clenched them into fists, pressing them against my thighs, trying to will my body back into calm. But how could I? The SUV hadn't just been tailing me, it had been hunting me. I scanned the road. Nothing. No sign of them, but I knew better than to believe they were gone. They were watching. Waiting. I forced myself to think I couldn't go home. That was the first place they'd look. My apartment, my family's house, anywhere familiar was a risk. They knew who I was. They knew where I lived. The thought sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through me. I needed to disappear. I pulled out my phone, hesitated. What if they were tracking it? My mind flashed back to the countless intelligence briefings we had in the military. Phones were vulnerabilities, always. If they had access to the right networks, they could listen, trace, monitor everything. I turned it off. Removed the battery. I couldn't stay here long. The gas station attendant, a kid no older than 19, was already eyeing me through the window, probably wondering why a battered soldier with haunted eyes was sitting in a dead car, looking like he'd just seen a ghost. I climbed out. The night air hit me crisp and cool. I zipped up my jacket, pulling the collar high, and walked inside. The overhead bell chimed as I stepped in. The kid behind the counter straightened. "You all right, man?" I forced a tired smile. "Yeah, just a long drive." He nodded but didn't look convinced. "You need anything?" I glanced around. The place was half-stocked, mostly dusty shelves filled with overpriced snacks and energy drinks. But they had prepaid phones. Perfect. I grabbed one off the rack, along with a pack of cigarettes I didn't plan to smoke. I needed to look normal, blend in. The kid rang me up, eyes flicking to the bruises along my jaw, the stiffness in my posture. "You sure you're okay?" I met his gaze. "Yeah, just rough week," he exhaled, nodding like he understood. "Been there, man." He handed me the bag. "Stay safe." I didn't respond. I stepped back into the night, peeling the prepaid phone from its plastic prison as I walked toward my car. I needed to call Avi. He was the only one who could make sense of this. I powered on the burner and dialed the number he'd given me. It rang. Once, twice, then straight to voicemail. No. I tried again. Same result. Dread curled in my stomach. I climbed back into the car, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. Avi had known something dangerous. And now he wasn't answering. I had to go back. I started the engine, pulling out of the station, heading back toward TZ Fat. My mind was a storm of possibilities, none of them good. Maybe he'd turned his phone off. Maybe he was just sleeping. But deep down, I knew better. The road stretched empty ahead of me, winding through the hills like veins through flesh. I pushed the car faster, adrenaline dulling the pain in my ribs, my focus razor-sharp. An hour passed. Then another. By the time I reached the small settlement, the sky was bleeding into dawn. The place was still, tucked into the hills like a secret. I pulled up to Avi's house, my stomach twisting. The door was open, not wide, just a sliver, enough to send every alarm in my body screaming. I stepped out of the car, my pulse roaring in my ears. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I approached. My hand hovered over the door, then pushed it open. The air inside was thick. Wrong. Avi's books were still on the shelves, but some had fallen, scattered across the floor. A table lay on its side. Papers littered the ground like a struggle had taken place, and then I saw him. Avi, slumped against the far wall, head bowed. A dark stain blooming across his shirt, my breath caught. "No." I moved before I could think, dropping to my knees beside him, my fingers pressing against his throat, searching for a pulse. Nothing. Avi was dead, the room blurred. My chest felt tight like the air had been sucked out. He had known. He had known, and now he was gone. I forced myself to look, to take in the scene. His face was frozen in something between pain and defiance. His hands were slack, but his right index finger was curled slightly, like he had been pointing at something. I followed the gesture. The floor. A book, one of the ones that had fallen, opened to a page near the middle. I reached for it, my hands shaking as I lifted it. The words blurred before sharpening into focus. A passage, marked, underlined. The deceivers will move in darkness, erasing those who see the light. They will come as shadows, leaving no trace. But the truth is not so easily silenced. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Avi had tried to warn me, and now he was dead. A sound outside, footsteps. I froze. They were still here. I pressed myself against the floor, heart hammering so hard I thought whoever was outside might hear it. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, crunching over gravel just beyond the door. My mind raced. If they were here to clean up, to tie up loose ends, I was as good as dead. I scanned the room. No weapons. No exits except for the front door and a small window partially covered by a wooden shutter. The room was a trap. If they came in, I had nowhere to go. The footsteps stopped, silence stretched. A thick, unnatural quiet, then a creak. The door shifted slightly on its hinges. Someone was testing it. I held my breath. Avi's body was still warm. Whoever had done this had barely left. And now they were back. Another creak. Then, finally, retreating steps. Slow, calculated. I waited, counting the seconds in my head. 20, 30. A full minute. Then a car engine rumbled to life. I didn't dare move until the sound faded into the distance. Only then did I exhale, muscles burning from how tightly I'd wound myself. My hands were still shaking as I pushed up from the floor, careful not to disturb anything. I couldn't stay. If they came back and found me, I'd end up just like Avi, but I couldn't leave without answers. My eyes fell to the book Avi had left open, the words underlined in dark ink. The deceivers will move in darkness, erasing those who see the light. This wasn't just a random attack. Avi had known something, and it had gotten him killed. And if I had learned anything from my time in the military, it was that people didn't kill to silence nothing. They killed to bury the truth. I scanned the room, searching for anything else he might have left for me. His desk was overturned, drawers ripped out, papers scattered. Whoever had come before me had been looking for something. Avi had expected this. I moved quickly, stepping over broken glass and loose pages. His books were lined on the shelves, thick and worn, filled with old wisdom and hidden knowledge. I ran my fingers over the spines, searching. Nothing stood out, but if I were Avi, if I knew I was about to be hunted, where would I leave something important? My eyes landed on the small wooden altar in the corner of the room. A single candle flickered there, untouched in the chaos. Beside it sat a small, ornate box. I stepped toward it, pulse quickening. The lid lifted easily, revealing a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it with careful hands. The handwriting was rushed, hurried. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. You were right to come. There isn't much time. I tried to warn you, but there's more. They don't just want control, they already have it. The illusion is deeper than you know. Watch the ones who claim to save. They will be the ones who lead you to ruin. My hands clenched around the paper. They don't just want control, they already have it. I didn't know who they were yet, but Avi had. And now he was dead. I folded the note and tucked it into my jacket. I couldn't stay here. I moved toward the window, prying it open as quietly as I could. The air outside was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth. I slipped through, landing in the soft dirt behind the house. I kept low, scanning the area. No movement, no signs of the car returning. But I wasn't stupid enough to think I was safe. I needed to disappear, and I needed to find out what Avi had died for. I slipped into the shadows and vanished into the night. The road stretched endlessly before me, bathed in the eerie glow of a fading moon. I kept the car at a steady speed, resisting the urge to drive faster. I couldn't afford to be pulled over. Not now. Not with Avi's note burning in my pocket like a live coal. I had no clear destination, just an overwhelming need to get away. Every shadow on the road felt like a threat. Every set of headlights in my rearview mirror made my stomach tighten. I kept glancing at the burner phone on the passenger seat, debating my next move. I needed help. But who could I trust? Avi had been the only one I was sure of, and he was gone. I had contacts from the military, but half of them had scattered after their service, and the other half were too close to the system. If Avi was right, if the deception was as deep as he claimed, then going to the wrong person wouldn't just be a mistake. It would be the end of me. I gripped the wheel tighter. I needed time to think, to plan. An hour passed. Then another. The road became emptier, the hills rolling into darkness. I pulled into a small roadside rest stop, parking near the far end where the streetlights barely reached. The moment I turned off the engine, the silence crashed in around me. I leaned back in my seat, trying to slow my breathing. Then I took out the note again. They don't just want control. They already have it. The illusion is deeper than you know. Watch the ones who claim to save. They will be the ones who lead you to ruin. What the hell had Avi gotten himself into? I thought back to our last conversation. He had been nervous, on edge, speaking in cryptic warnings. Things aren't what they seem. It's bigger than politics, bigger than war. Back then, I had dismissed it as paranoia. I had assumed he was just seeing ghosts after too many years in intelligence. But now he was dead, and I had seen the look in his eyes before he left that message for me. He had known. I rubbed a hand over my face, exhaustion pressing down on me. My body was still sore from the attack, but there was no time to rest. I reached for the burner phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. It rang once, twice, a click. A deep, measured voice came through the line. "Who is this?" I swallowed. "It's me." Silence. Then, "You shouldn't be calling this number." "I didn't have a choice," I said. "I need your help." A pause. Then, with quiet urgency, "Where are you?" I hesitated. "Not safe." "That makes two of us." That sent a chill through me. I had expected reluctance, maybe even anger, but not fear. I sat up straighter. "What's going on?" A sigh. "I don't know yet, but if you're calling me, then you've seen it too." A cold weight settled in my gut. "Seen what?" Another pause. Then, lower this time, "The cracks." I glanced around the empty parking lot, suddenly feeling exposed. "I need to meet." "In person." "Too dangerous," he said immediately. "They're watching everything now. If Avi reached out to you, they know. You need to get off the grid. Now." A shiver ran through me. "He's dead." Silence. A long, heavy silence. Then, "Damn it." I gritted my teeth. "I need to know what he was working on." "You don't. You need to run." Anger flared in my chest. "I'm done running." A sharp breath. "Then you're already dead." I clenched my jaw. "I'm not stopping. Not until I know the truth." A beat of hesitation. "Then, there's a place. Near Beersheba. Abandoned factory off Route 40. Midnight. One chance. If you're late, I'm gone." The line went dead. I sat there gripping the phone until my knuckles ached. Midnight, that gave me a few hours. I tossed the phone onto the seat and started the engine. The road ahead was dark. But I had no choice but to follow it. I drove, but my mind was somewhere else. Somewhere far away from the winding roads of Israel. Somewhere in the bleak landscape of what Avi had seen and tried to warn me about. The hours felt like they were pulling me deeper into some twisted web, and the further I drove, the more I could sense it tightening. The factory was just ahead. Beersheba, an abandoned relic of something long forgotten, an outpost left to rot. I arrived early. The place was a shell, rusting metal and broken windows. Everything about it screamed danger. But it wasn't the crumbling structure that held my attention. It was the nagging sense that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I parked a distance away, the headlights cutting through the creeping fog. Silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Not a single sound, no birds, no breeze, nothing to break the quiet. I kept the engine running as I scanned the area, eyes darting from shadow to shadow. The factory loomed, its structure cast in dark angles, like the spine of a beast long dead, forgotten by time. It looked like a place where secrets could be buried without anyone ever asking questions. My phone buzzed, breaking my focus. I reached for it, the tension building. It was an encrypted message from an unknown number. Don't trust anyone. The ones who claim to be the most trustworthy are the ones who will lead you straight into their trap. Trust only what you've seen with your own eyes. I stared at the message. My hands tightened on the phone. The words rang in my head. Trust only what you've seen with your own eyes. I knew better than to blindly follow anyone. I had seen too much of the world to believe in perfect systems, in perfect people. Avi's death had confirmed that. He had known something, and it had cost him everything. Whoever was waiting for me tonight might be my only lead, but they weren't safe. They couldn't be. I pushed the phone back into my pocket and cut the engine. The factory's silhouette loomed closer as I crept toward the entrance. The fog thickened, and for a moment the world seemed to vanish into the gray. My boots crunched on the gravel as I approached the heavy metal door. It was half open, just enough to slip through. I hesitated, listening for sounds, voices, footsteps. But there was only the sound of my breath in the thick, stagnant air. I pushed the door wide, stepping inside. The darkness enveloped me, broken only by the faintest slivers of moonlight streaming through cracks in the roof. The smell of rust, oil, and something foul hung in the air. The place was a maze of forgotten machinery, towering structures that felt as if they were designed to trap, not create. My eyes darted, trying to make out shapes in the dark. A voice broke the stillness. "You're late." I froze, heart leaping into my throat. A figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, gaunt man with sharp eyes that gleamed in the low light. His face was familiar, but I couldn't place it. I felt like I should know him. "Who are you?" I asked, voice steady but with an edge of uncertainty. The man smiled thinly. "No need for introductions. I know exactly who you are. You're the one who found the note." I didn't respond. "You're lucky," he continued, stepping closer. "Most people don't survive long enough to find it." His eyes glinted, almost with amusement. "You must be wondering why you're still alive after everything. After Avi." But it's simple, really. He was weak. He couldn't see the big picture. A cold dread crept up my spine. "The big picture," the man chuckled. "Oh, you'll understand soon enough. You see, the world as you know it, it's all an illusion, a carefully constructed lie, and Avi." He was starting to see through it, but he couldn't handle the truth. No one can. I stepped back, heart pounding. "What are you talking about?" He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small black device. It looked like a simple pager, but the moment he pressed it, a screen flickered to life, casting a harsh glow over his face. "You've seen enough to know the truth is out there," he said. "But there's more. There are others who don't want you to see what we've uncovered. They'll stop at nothing to keep it buried." He tapped a few buttons on the device. A map appeared on the screen, the red dots marking places across the globe. "These are the nodes," he continued. "The centers of power, the ones pulling the strings. They're watching, controlling everything." I shook my head, not understanding. "You're saying there's some grand conspiracy." His smile was cold. "It's not a conspiracy. It's the way the world has always worked. The powerful few, hiding in plain sight, manipulating everything you think you know. And the worst part is, you don't even know who they are." I took a step back, my mind reeling. "And what, you think you can stop them?" The man's eyes narrowed. "We've already started." He walked closer, the device still glowing in his hands. Avi understood. He wasn't strong enough to face it, but you might be different. I could feel the weight of his words pressing down on me like a heavy hand on my chest. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice hoarse. He paused, his eyes locking onto mine. "Help us expose them. Help us reveal the truth. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be able to survive long enough to see it all burn." I stood frozen, unsure of how to respond. Every instinct in me screamed to turn and run, but I couldn't. I had already seen too much, and now I was tangled in something far bigger than myself. I had to know. I had to understand what Avi had died for, but as I opened my mouth to speak, the floor beneath me trembled and a loud crash echoed from deeper inside the factory. Someone was here. Someone was coming. The man's eyes flashed with panic. "It's too late," he muttered. "They found us." He grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the back exit. But before we could reach it, the lights flickered and then cut out completely. We were plunged into darkness, the sound of footsteps growing louder, closer. I didn't have time to think, just to react. The man's grip tightened around my arm as he yanked me toward the rear exit. I could feel the weight of his urgency, but I was frozen for a moment, caught in the suffocating blackness. My senses were screaming, warning me, but I didn't know what I was running from. I only knew I had to run. The sound of footsteps echoed, footsteps that were deliberate, unhurried. Whoever was coming didn't need to rush. They already had us. The factory, abandoned and hollowed out, suddenly felt like a trap closing in on me from every angle. There was nowhere to hide, no way to escape. We stumbled through the factory, the man pulling me faster, ducking behind rusty equipment, slipping between shadows. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat vibrating through my body, each step louder in the silence. The map, the warning about the powerful ones watching from the shadows, the vague promises of revolution. They were all starting to feel like pieces of a puzzle that had been shoved into place before I had a chance to understand what it meant. The man stopped abruptly, dragging me into a narrow hallway where the darkness seemed thicker, heavier. "We'll take the back," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "It's the only way out now." His voice was low but strained, as if he too could feel the pressure closing in. "Who are they?" I hissed, my breath sharp from the running, adrenaline surging through me. "Who are these people you're talking about? What do they want?" He looked at me. His eyes were wide with fear, his lips pressed into a tight line. "You won't understand until it's too late," he muttered, almost to himself. "You can't. But trust me when I say you're already in it. You're already in their game." I didn't have time to process that because then I heard it, a sharp noise like a door slamming open, and then another, and another. I had to think fast. I grabbed the man's arm and pulled him into a nearby room. There was no time to think about who was chasing us or why. I needed to survive first. We crouched low and I pressed my back against the cold concrete wall, barely breathing, my mind a swirl of thoughts I couldn't catch. The man beside me was tense, every muscle coiled, ready to spring. I could see his lips moving, muttering something under his breath. A prayer, a curse, I wasn't sure. We waited, listening. The sound of boots on metal echoed through the factory. Voices muffled and distant, but unmistakably close. Then, a metallic sound, the unmistakable click of a gun being readied. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breath. No time. No time. The man beside me stood up, motioning for me to follow, and we moved quickly, silently, toward the back door. But as we reached the threshold, the door to the hallway creaked open. The flashlight beam hit us instantly. "Stop!" a voice barked, sharp and commanding. The man pulled me backward into the shadows. "Don't move," he hissed, his breath ragged in my ear. "We're trapped." There was no choice now. I reached into my jacket, fingers brushing against the cold metal of the device he had shown me, the map, the thing that had marked this place, this moment. If I was going to survive, if I was going to understand anything at all, I needed to get out of here. I needed to learn more. I glanced at the man beside me. He was breathing heavily, clearly terrified, but there was something else in his eyes, something darker. I had seen that same look before in men who had seen too much, who had been in too deep. This man was not just a pawn in some bigger game. He was part of it. He had to be. I needed answers. Answers that he might have, answers I might not be ready for. Where are they? The voice outside shouted, now much closer. I looked back at the man. Tell me what's really going on. I could feel the words slipping out before I could stop them. He didn't answer right away. His gaze flicked over my shoulder to the door, then back to me. His hand was still gripping my arm almost too tightly, but there was a moment, a fleeting moment where I saw it in his eyes, recognition, fear, and yes, even pity. You'll never escape them, he muttered, almost a whisper. Not unless you're willing to give everything up. I didn't have time to respond, because in that instant the door to the hallway swung open and a flood of light poured in. Found them. A voice called out from the doorway, followed by a series of rapid footsteps. Get them! My heart stopped. A voice in the back of my mind screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. There was nowhere safe. They had us surrounded. The man yanked me forward and we both bolted through the narrow hall, running faster now, with no choice but to move ahead. I could hear the sound of men chasing us, their heavy footsteps shaking the floor. I had no idea how we'd make it out of this, no idea where we could hide. But as the man dragged me toward the back exit, something shifted in me. A deep resolve I hadn't expected. The door ahead of us was closed, but there was no time to hesitate, no time to think. The man shoved it open, and the world outside came crashing in. The night air was colder than I expected, and I inhaled sharply, gasping for breath. We weren't safe yet, but we had to move. I turned, looking back at the factory, the place that had been a trap from the start, the place that was nothing more than a gateway to something far worse. The light from the building flickered behind us. We were running from something bigger than we could understand, but I knew one thing, I wasn't going to stop. We ran. The cold air bit at my skin, and my lungs burned as I gasped for breath. Every step taking me farther from the factory and deeper into an unknown nightmare. I could hear the pounding of footsteps behind us, their echoes growing louder, closing in. The man beside me didn't look back. His face was set, jaw clenched, his every movement swift and calculated as he pushed us forward. I stumbled to keep pace, but the fear, the urgency, it gave me the strength I needed. I had to keep running. I had to outrun whatever was chasing us. We veered off the main road, heading into a dense patch of woods, the trees twisting into dark, gnarled shapes as if they, too, were part of the shadowy forces following us. The man pulled me through the underbrush, his eyes darting around as if he expected someone to jump out at us from every direction. "We need to get to the safe house," he muttered, not slowing down, not even looking at me. His voice was hoarse, frantic. "They'll be waiting for us, but we can't let them catch us here." "Safe house," I barely managed to ask between breaths. "What are you talking about? Who are these people? Who are you?" But the man didn't answer. He was too focused on the path ahead, his eyes scanning every shadow, every rustling leaf. I could tell from his expression that there was something he wasn't telling me, something he couldn't. But I didn't have time to press him for answers. If we stopped for too long, if we didn't find shelter, we were as good as dead. We broke through the woods and found a narrow dirt road leading to a rundown building, a shack, really, barely standing under the weight of time. The man pushed the door open without hesitation, and we ducked inside. Inside was a different world. The space was cramped, cluttered with old furniture and strange equipment that I couldn't begin to understand. It smelled of dust, mildew, and something metallic. But what struck me most was the large map that covered an entire wall. It was covered with markings, red circles, crosses, and arrows, marking locations across the world. Locations that seemed random at first, but now, seeing it in the dim light, they made sense. "This is where they are operating from," the man said, voice low but steady. He stepped in front of the map, his fingers trailing over the markings. "We've been tracking them for years. They've infiltrated everything, governments, organizations, corporations. They're everywhere. I couldn't breathe. The weight of his words hit me like a ton of bricks. Who are they? Why are they doing this? The man's expression darkened, his eyes narrowing in a way that made me feel like I was seeing a side of him I hadn't noticed before. They're not human, he whispered, his voice trembling with the weight of his own words. At least, not in the way we think. They've been hiding in plain sight for centuries, and now they're ready. They're ready to take everything. I shook my head, trying to make sense of the madness spilling from his lips. But you're part of this, aren't you? You know what they want. You know who they are. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to look at the map again, his fingers tracing the lines between the red marks. After a long, tense silence, he spoke again. They want control, he said, his voice thick with anger. Control of everything, of you, of me, of the world. They've been feeding us lies for so long that we don't even see it anymore. I stepped closer to the map, my mind racing. But why? What do they want us to do? The man turned sharply to me, his eyes full of desperation. We're all part of it, every last one of us. They've already infiltrated every level of society, and we've been too blind to see it. And now, his voice faltered, his gaze drifting to the window, where the shadows outside seemed to press closer. Now they've come for the last